Gavel, but we'll call to order this special work session. Nettle Creek School Board, for all members present, the exception of Mr. Sankey, Mrs. Houghton, and Mrs. Boss. Can we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, a moment of silence, please? Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. All right, this is the time for public input. I don't believe we have anybody for that, so we'll move to our open work session.
Awesome. I will turn it over first to Jason Tanzel from Baker Tilly. We have worked with them, if you recall, quite a few times in planning for different projects and understanding our debt capacity and things like that. So Jason is going to kick us off and also give us some updates on the recent changes in the legislative session and how that impacts us now and moving forward.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Emily. My name is Jason Tansel. I'm a director with Baker Tilly, and we've helped this school corporation for the last decade plus. Actually, one of the very first engagements I worked on was this school corporation's 2012 bonds. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. The presentation before you really is kind of a two-part presentation. The first part that we would like to review is just some Senate Bill 1 updates. I know we've all talked about it, read about it, so on and so forth, but now that we're about 6 weeks beyond that, we can start putting some pencil to paper to start to quantify some potential impacts that Senate Bill 1 may have on the school. Obviously, a major push for Senate Bill 1 was taxpayer relief, which is obviously great for our taxpayers, but we just need to be mindful of some of the impacts that this may have to the school corporation. And so I really want this to be, I was just telling Emily prior, this presentation can take as long as an hour. I could probably be done with this in 30 minutes. And so I just want this to be informational. Please cut me off if there's anything I say that doesn't make sense. If you want to ask a question in the moment, I would prefer this to be a little more interactive. Because breaks would be appreciated for the slide deck. So anyways, with that, we'll just go into slide 2. And realistically, I'm not going to read every single one of these Senate enrolled acts to you, but there's just some things we wanted to highlight that did impact schools. Senate Enrolled Act 146, beginning teacher pay, that is established at $45,000 now. Also, compensation of teacher pay from education fund expenses is increasing from 62 to 65%. And that takes effect here in a few weeks, this July 1.
Just to put those two things in perspective, our starting pay is at 47, so check. And we had not met the 62%. And so obviously we will not meet the 65, but continue to chip away at that.
We're real close though.
Yes, we were very close.
That's perfect. That's where I like that interaction. So cut me off at any time. That's great. Looking at controlled project thresholds. So you can see kind of the remainder of these enrolled acts. This is Senate Enrolled Act 1 or Senate Bill 1. And you can see there was a lot that went into this bill that dealt with project thresholds, referenda, property tax relief, local income tax, and also some charter school language. And so being mindful that the controlled project threshold is now a dollar figure and a tax rate figure. You can see here that if a school has a debt service tax rate that's over 70 cents, that automatically, if you wanted to do any sort of bonding project, that would be on a ballot. Now, for Nettle Creek, you're very far away from 70 cents, but we want to be mindful of the fact that the property tax relief that was passed may have a decreasing impact to the assessed value of the school. So just being mindful that assessed value is a very large driver of the school's total tax rate and just where that may be going in the future. Referendum timing, this was a big one as well. This is a November general elections only. So this means that referenda questions, whether that be for a bond project or whether that be for an operating referendum, can only be on a ballot in November of every even year. So I do think that there was some language about November of 25, you could do something, but moving forward, November of 26, November of 28, November of 30, so on and so forth. So you wouldn't be able to have a special election in May, and you wouldn't be able to do it on an odd year. So you have to be very thoughtful if this was something the school was looking at to be on a November even year ballot. There was also legislation about a general obligation off period. This is taking into account what was once considered a non-controlled project and the repayment terms of that. And so we can dive into that a little bit later when we look at the school's debt profile. Really a big one here, property tax deductions. Homestead deductions are changing. In Indiana, the standard deduction, supplemental homestead deduction, those have been established at $48,000 and between 35 and 40% of assessed value of homes. And so those are changing, and it's a 6-year runway. They'll begin changing next year in 2026. So with taxes payable next year in 2026, they'll be fully implemented by 2031. So a decent runway to see how this could impact assessed value, see the kind of relief this provides to taxpayers, but it changes every single year, so it does make it slightly complicated. Local income tax, I'm going to skip excessive levy appeals, but local income tax, this does impact the school. Right now, Nettle Creek is able to receive about $75,000 of local income tax from Wayne County, but that will go away starting in 2028. And also there is some language now about sharing revenues with charter schools, both in the operations fund and in any operating referenda fund. This won't apply to Nettle Creek given the criteria, and we'll kind of walk you through an example of that, but something to be mindful of there's now revenue sharing with charter schools in Indiana. And then finally, the budget process changed a little bit as well. There's now a new step that begins in when you're thinking about, we're approaching budget season now, right? We have that in September timeframe for a 2026 budget. In 3 years, this will be a little bit different. There'll be more process and procedures. Any questions on some of these major items that we wanted to highlight? Okay, let's dive into some numbers. Slide 3, Senate Enrolled Act 1, homestead credits. This is different from the deductions we were talking about earlier. This homestead credit is new, and this is since this is a credit, this is a reduction to tax bills. So this is taxpayer called the supplemental homestead credit, and it is calculated based upon the lesser of $300 or 10% of a total property tax bill. We could go through the example of what this actually means, but we are attempting to quantify this number using some housing data that we have from the U.S. Census Bureau. And knowing that from the U.S. Census Bureau that the median home value from 2023 was $145,000. So that's 2 years delayed. So let's keep that in mind, that home worth $145,000 in 2023 might be worth more today. But also quantifying the number of homesteads that we have within the school corporation's boundaries. We are calculating this $300 or 10% credit to be between $120,000 and $260,000 of property taxes that the school corporation will not receive beginning next year in 2026. So right off the bat, this homestead credit is property tax relief, but the school corporation will not be receiving this credit from individual taxpayers. So revenue the school corporation will not necessarily realize moving forward. You can also see that we've detailed out some additional credits as well, 65 and over, disabled homeowner, disabled veteran. And so those credits are applicable as well, and just something to be mindful of. But
Build on that. They
Correct.
can build on.
Right. Any questions on the homestead credits? So just the big one being the new supplemental homestead credit. Okay. Slide 4. These are not credits, but deductions. And these are homestead properties. So these are only applicable to taxpayers who, this is their home, they're the home that they pay taxes on. And today, when we look at the way the law is written, the standard deduction is $48,000. And then after that deduction is applied, there's an additional supplemental homestead credit of 37.5%. So looking at below the illustrative impact of that median home value we were referencing of 145,000. Once you apply the standard deduction of 48,000 and then the additional 37.5% supplemental, the actual net assessed value of this home upon which we pay taxes is $60,625. This is the sliding scale we were talking about, that these deductions are changing over time. So there's a fairly long runway until we get to 2031. But you can see what these are changing to where eventually by the time we get to 2031, there actually is no standard deduction. It's zero, but the supplemental deduction is 2/3 of the property's value. So what this would mean in 2031 is that $145,000 market value home has a net assessed value of $48,285, and that's what we would pay our taxes on. So if that home is being valued less from the county assessor because of these supplemental credits, then potentially the assessed value of all homes in the area will be going down, providing taxpayer relief. But that assessed value could potentially decrease the assessed value of the school corporation. So just keep that in mind when we look at these standard and supplemental homestead deductions. This one is a fairly heavy slide. I know there's a lot of numbers, but are there any questions on this slide?
I think so. We got questions.
Absolutely.
Is somewhat the assumption here, I know you're using a flat home value of 145,000. But realistically, that's not very accurate because home values are going to likely go up.
Absolutely.
So we don't know what that number is.
Correct.
But that's going to change that spread a little bit. And it might not be, I mean, everything's going to cost more, but it might not be as applicable or as impactful to the real number. Is that kind of hypothetically?
Probably
Yeah.
more impactful
Okay, so it would be more impactful.
because you're going from a flat number to a percentage. So
Okay. Got it.
the bigger chunk of the bigger number is the
Okay.
bigger number too.
That's where I was trying to wrap my head around that, what that was actually going to look like, assuming that property values are going to go up.
Exactly. So I did want to, you beat me to my.
Oh,
What,
sorry.
the easiest way to show this is to assume that, hey, all else constant, right?
Right.
I mean,
I understand.
so that's where I definitely think that you are absolutely correct. This doesn't take into account that the assessment of this home is going to potentially increase in the next 5 to 6 years. So just for reference, then, if you were to think about the net AV of 2025 of $60,000, how much would this $145,000 home have to be worth in 2031 for that net AV to be the same, let's say? So the net AV just remaining flat for the school corporation. And that number is about $184,000. So if you were to just take 184,000 and again, you apply a 66% credit, meaning you pay taxes on about 33%, that's about a $61,000 net assessed value for that home. So you're absolutely right. There's definitely a world where by 2031, that $145,000 home is worth 184,000, and that net AV is the same. Yes, that's really good. That's what you beat me to my end of the slide. I don't want to sit here and say your AV is going to go down 6%, 2% each year. It's just the easiest way for us to quantify these credits are increasing. Without a doubt, or excuse me, these deductions are increasing.
So we need to make everybody want to come to Hagerstown schools so that
Right.
home prices go up.
Well, and let's find some housing.
I was getting ready to.
I just had that conversation with Emily. I said, one of our biggest roadblocks is we don't have any new housing coming in. Right.
Where to put new housing.
We,
On planning commission too, and that's another topic.
well, that's conversation for another day.
Jason, so when you think about, like, we will see our first impact in 2026 on property taxes. Okay, so when you think about planning for that impact, what does that look like?
I think that it's just fair to assume AV may not grow. We are not making assessed value. When I say AV, I mean assessed value. I'm sorry. We're not making any assessed value projections at this time just because so much has changed. But I think that we have a slide that shows the assessed value of district has grown every single year for the past 5 years. But maybe that won't be the case going forward. So realistically, because assessed value is such a large driver of the tax rate, and if your message has been tax rate, we're not going to increase the tax rate. I would just say there's a world where we need to be cognizant that even if we do nothing, the tax rate may increase because of these deductions. So just keep that in mind, that we've had the messaging be tax rate so often, but realistically, that may be increasing even if nothing really changes from the school's perspective on its operations fund or its debt fund.
I think that right there is important for us because that has been at least from my perspective, that has been our message, is that the tax rate will not change. Or the tax rate will change this or that if we're doing a certain project. And now we could do nothing and the tax rate may change. We were talking with clients about how the fact that, given where your tax rate is, what happens if your tax rate goes up X amount? Just, are you ready? Are you planning for that, preparing for that? Just where because of such strong assessed value growth that the state in general has experienced, if the school would have done nothing, in theory, tax rates would have fallen. And you'll actually see that's what's happened here at Nettle Creek, is that the tax rate's fallen from over $1.10 to about 95, 96 cents. So the tax rate has fallen here in Nettle Creek. And potentially there's just a world where it's the opposite because of these deductions, which is good taxpayer relief, but tax rates may go up. So these are just the homestead deductions. There was something new passed in Senate Enrolled Act 1 for non-homestead deductions. And this is going to provide relief to our taxpayers in the 2% category, which when we say 2%, that really identifies agricultural land, non-homestead properties, meaning maybe rental properties, and then long-term healthcare facilities. So you can see here on our first table that there is no deduction for a 2% property this year in Pay 25. There hasn't been a deduction for these properties for our farmland. But moving forward, this deduction will be increasing on another sliding scale to 2031 to where 6% next year in 2026, all the way up to 1/3, 33.4% of a deduction by 2031. So this will be so essentially what this is saying is, if you have a farmland worth $500,000, is that by 2031, again, it's assuming it's still worth 500, that would be closer to $360,000 because of this 33% deduction. So we'd be paying taxes not on 500,000, but paying taxes on something closer to 360,000 or so. Also, there was an exemption threshold change to business personal property. There is something called a de minimis exemption for reporting business personal property, and this was historically $80,000. This is changing, not next year, but by Pay 27 to $2 million. And we just wanted to highlight this because what this is saying is that for equipment purposes, anything under $80,000 was not required to be reported. So it may not show up on your assessed value. Anything over $80,000 was required to be reported, and we would potentially pay taxes on that equipment. This will be changing fairly substantially, as you can see, from $80,000 to $2 million. So our business personal property, hypothetically, if there was a piece of equipment that was worth $1 million that potentially is increasing assessed value of the school, that would no longer be required to be reported. It would be under this de minimis exemption, and that assessed value would go away. Obviously not paying taxes on it, but then the assessed value, of course, inversely could decrease. Also important to note here, I wish we probably should bold this, but there's a note there at the bottom that says removes 30% personal property floor for equipment placed in service after this January 1. What this also means is that if you have a new piece of machinery that goes into effect after January 2025, this can now be not amortized. What's what I'm looking for? The accounting term to depreciate. Thank you. Wow, I wanted to use the word amortize, but depreciate. You can depreciate that piece of property equipment to zero. Whereas prior to Senate Enrolled Act 1, if it was worth $1 million, you could only depreciate it to $300,000, 30%. That minimum floor is gone.
So again, that could have some impacts on our business personal property assessed values. Also wanted to highlight on our next slide, slide 6, just some history of where the base rate has been for agricultural land. Here that kind of peaked there, and base rate is established by the Department of Local Government Finance by the state of Indiana. We know that this changes per acre based upon, productivity factors, market value, things of that nature. But the base rate established by the state, you can see in pay 25 was $2,390, and written into Senate Enrolled Act 1, this will be decreasing from $2,390 to $2,120 next year in pay 26. That's about an 11 to 12% reduction in assessed values for our base rate of farmland as well. So thinking about the relief to farmers, we have the assessed value decreasing from the base rate from the state from $2,390 down to $2,120. That's about an 11% reduction. And then on top of that, that farmland will now be eligible starting next year for a 6% deduction of that assessed value as well. So decreases to assessed value from Senate Enrolled Act 1 for farmland. They have put into Senate Enrolled Act 1 next year, pay 27 will not be 2120, but rather 2240. So that's why you see that kind of hash bar increasing a little bit in 2027. Typically, this has been established as the 6-year non-farm income average throughout the state. And realistically, I guess moving forward, I don't know if that calculation will be changing or not, but for the next 2 years, we know it is 2120 and 2240. So slide 7, I think, is just a helpful visual about, I'm talking about deductions and assessed value and a 1% cap, a 2% cap, and a 3% cap. And what does that really mean? So I'm going to start with that first pie chart to the left. This is Nettle Creek Schools' gross assessed valuation breakdown as it pertains to the amount of assessed value in each individual cap, that 1% being our homesteads, that 2% being our agricultural land rentals and long-term healthcare facilities, and that 3% being business commercial property. You can see here that about 54% of the assessed value within the district is within that homestead 1% threshold. 30% in the rental farmland and long-term healthcare facility, and 3% in business commercial property. Once we apply these deductions that are already existing, so I want to make this clear, this is pay 25, not pay 26, because we're not going to make that assumption yet. But you can see what those homestead deductions do to the school's net assessed value, as far as we know that a $145,000 home, after you apply deductions today, has a net assessed value that's actually less than half. It's about $60,000. You can see it changes the composition of this pie of who's actually paying the taxes, of 32% to the homesteads, 46% to the 2%, and 22% to the business property. So thinking about the fact that this will be shifting in pay 26, and thinking about the new deductions, the increased deductions to homesteads, the increased deductions to agricultural land, 2% properties, and then as well as business personal property for the 3%. This will be changing. And so we just wanted to bring to your attention how much assessed value, according to your county abstracts, is farmland. And down there at the bottom, that's bold, about 116 million of the school's net assessed value is in farmland. And so today, the net assessed value of the school corporation, if I recall, is about $369 million. 116 million of that is farmland. But thinking about potentially this could be reduced next year in 2026 with the reassessment of the base rate and the deductions available to farmland. Also wanted to highlight how much is in business personal property, since those are changing. And we don't really know just how many pieces of equipment are in that business personal property, but we know the assessed value of it tallied by the county auditor is 34.5 million, or about 10% of the school's net assessed value is in business personal property. We know that these are going to be changing in pay 26, but I think starting the groundwork of understanding where is the assessed value within the district is helpful to understand how these deductions might moving forward. I go on, are there any questions? I'm also gonna take a little bit of a break to drink some water. If you think of anything, please don't hesitate to jump in or email Emily, and I'll get back to the board to answer any questions. But we're talking about potentially future changes. We wanted to also provide a snapshot of where we've been. So with slide 8, this is just a very brief summary of the school's net assessed value. Was 274 million 5 years ago, and that has increased to 369 million this year in pay 25. So some pretty substantial increases you'll see in 2023 and 2025. I think our next slide, though, is really helpful to understand what has this increase in assessed value done to the tax rate. And you'll see here that in 2021, the total tax rate of the school was $1.11. And that when we saw that really large increase in assessed value in 2023, that dropped the school's tax rate to about 98 cents. And again, you can see that tax rate has continued to fall from 98 to 95 to 93 cents here this year in 25. So the school corporation's tax rate over the last 4 years has fallen by 19 cents. So if you're ever out in the community and you get asked that question about a tax bill, you can confidently say that our tax rate has fallen by about 19 cents. We wanted to highlight, though, that composition of the total tax rate, where how much of it is in debt service. You can see based upon that new law that was enacted about any school that has any debt service tax rate over 70 cents automatically on a ballot. We wanted to highlight where's Nettle Creek. You can see you're pretty far away from that. You're at 37 cents today, but it is something to just keep in mind as you think about potential debt plans down the road. We don't want to potentially be too close to 70 cents because anything you would do, even if it was a $500,000 paving project, it would be on a ballot and you'd have to wait every even year, so on and so forth. And then finally, we also talk about how much is being levied and how much is being realized by circuit breaker. You can see school corporations levy. This is the word we use for the annual dollar requests between these two funds in the operations and debt service. You can see it's been fairly consistent at that $3.1 million mark. And that you can see this levy request has realized a circuit breaker loss to the school of about $260,000 over the last 2 years. So
some new board members, we explain circuit breaker.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Amber just asked if I could take a very high level on circuit breaker. Circuit breaker was enacted in 2008 and it is also taxpayer relief. What circuit breaker does is it essentially establishes a maximum cap of property taxes that a taxpayer could pay. And the easiest example I could give is that homesteads, their cap is 1%. And so that's where I keep saying, oh, homesteads 1%, farmland 2%, commercial 3%. That's from circuit breaker. So a homestead property tax cap is 1%, meaning if your home is worth $100,000, the most you will ever pay in property taxes is $1,000, 1% of your home's total gross assessed value. That's the gross assessed value, the market value. That's not net assessed value. That is an important distinction because we just walked through all those deductions. So it's 1% of the market value of your home. This cap, so essentially, if you think about if there was a tax rate high enough to where this $100,000 home, let's say the total tax rate is $2 instead of $1. Total tax rate is $2. That could mean that the tax bill is, before circuit breaker, the tax bill would be $1,200. But that homeowner would never pay that full $1,200. There would be a credit of just essentially the taxpayer not paying this $200 difference between $1,200 and that maximum being established at $1,000. I can send you some slides on circuit breaker. I apologize. I have slides on circuit breaker that actually walk through this that are much easier to see as opposed to me talking through. But essentially, the biggest thing I could tell you is homesteads have a 1% cap. Farmland has a 2% cap, and commercial property has a 3% cap. And so we do have some homeowners here where if we have circuit breaker of $260,000, what that is essentially saying is that there are some homeowners who are at their cap, meaning that even if the school is asking for $120, they will only pay $100 because they are protected by that 1% cap. The school never sees that $200, it's just not paid. That is determined by the county auditor, if you're ever curious. Also, if you're looking, I know property tax bills came out a few months ago. It's really detailed very well in your property tax bill as well individually. So you could look at it there. If you're kind of looking like, what am I at the cap, or all that, you could look at your own tax bill. I will tell you, circuit breaker is one of the more complicated topics. So that's why I wish I would have had some slides. I'm sorry. That's a complicated topic, not to be glossed over.
Just knew we had new faces.
Yeah,
And that's a
no, I
big
appreciate
firm,
that. So slide 11, referendum summary. You can see we've kind of, the biggest one, I think we've already hit on top right corner, even number of years, general election. But we also want to just continue to hit on the point that if you were to do a bonding project, that's what we call a capital referendum project. That for schools, anything over 70 cents in debt would automatically put you on the ballot. On slide 12, there's a lot of words on this slide. We kind of hit on this 6-year average non-farm income number that is typically used to calculate the maximum levy growth quotient. If we were to have used that calculation this year, the maximum levy growth quotient for the school's operations fund would have been 5.6%. Incident Enrolled Act 1, they capped this at 4%. I'm bringing this up because the operations fund. So if you think about the tax rate slide that we had that has blue debt service and the gray operations. Operations is limited as to how much it can grow. Debt service can grow if you go through the right legal process, if you want a referendum ballot, if you go through all the legal steps, the debt service tax rate is not limited as to how much it can grow. It's dependent upon the bond payments. I bring this up because the operations fund is limited, and the amount that the operations levy can ever grow is established by the state. And Amber could advertise out to wazoo a really high operations levy and rate, but we will not be allowed to ever take it. It can only grow at 4%. We wanted to highlight this because if your operations fund levy has a maximum growth quotient of 4% and you grow your operations levy 4%, but your AV even stays flat, then the operations rate will increase. You're asking for 4% more in the operations levy, but the AV is staying the same, meaning that that tax rate may go up a little bit. And this is what we wanted to talk about as far as if you do nothing, that rate may increase with some of these deductions in play. So other than that 4%, I don't really want to highlight anything else on this slide unless anybody has any questions on the excess levy appeals. You want to go over a hypothetical charter school revenue share example, knowing that at the bottom we've noted that Nettle Creek does not meet the criteria to share this revenue. Okay.
I would say no, but maybe board members want to.
Agree.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
No.
Congratulations.
Full pass, thank you though.
All right. You are not losing a substantial amount of kids to charter schools, so you are not required to, as of today, share any sort of your revenue with charter schools. We wanted to spend a little time on local income tax because this changed substantially. And while schools in Indiana are essentially funded by the state. That's the per pupil funding where we focus on that's dependent upon enrollment. That is not property tax dollars, that is dollars from the state. And then it's also funded by property taxes, which is why we spend so much time on these deductions. Where's assessed value going? What's the tax rate? Is the school's other piece of the pie revenue is property taxes. But the local income tax structure changed quite a bit with Senate Enrolled Act 1 as well. And you can see the different rates and rate adoption units here on this slide about the new maximum local income tax rate being 2.9%. Some counties use local income taxes to implement what is called property tax replacement credits. Henry County, for example, does this. You can see we footnoted that Henry County has a property tax replacement credit rate of about 14.12%. Starting in 2028, property tax replacement credits will go away. They will be no more. And so local income tax will still be in play. Local income tax is not going away, but local income tax will not be able to be utilized for property tax replacement credits. And so property tax replacement credits essentially help reduce taxpayer bills and in essence also can reduce circuit breaker tax credit losses. That's a very, very dense topic, but it's important to at least note that Henry County, I know you East Liberty, I'm not mistaken, in Henry County has a okay. I know there's one. I was looking at it yesterday. Anyways, 14% property tax replacement credit where in East Liberty that will go away in 2028. The school does receive $75,000 from the county in that local income tax, and so that will be going away in the future as well. So that's where I'm talking a lot. I've gone through percentages, examples, 1%, 2%, yada, yada, yada. But we're trying to also quantify just potential revenue reductions. And so in 2028, there will not be $75,000 of local income tax received by the school. And then again, with that supplemental homestead credit, we talked about on slide 2, that maybe $120,000 to $260,000 loss of that supplemental homestead credit. So starting to add some of these pieces up about potentially less revenue for the school.
Say what you said again, Jason. So you anticipate as early as what year local income tax goes away, and is it 2028 or next year? 2028. So we'll have that revenue until 2028. When you think about property tax credits, what, just a guesstimate, what does that look like in 26 versus 28?
That's a great question because it's an annual credit. And so that number is, I would say, it's dependent upon almost every single variable of assessed value, tax rate, what are your other units doing? So it's really hard for me to tell you today what we think that would be in 2028. When we're telling you $120,000 for that property tax replacement credit as early as next year, that's using 25 data, because we don't know what the county or the city might do as far as their tax rates are concerned. And so we're just applying what we know today in 2025 and assuming what's the lesser of the $300 or the 10%.
It's fair to say that we will have $120,000 less revenue in our operations as early as next year.
That is fair.
And it's fair to say it's likely that that number will grow over the course.
I don't know if that is fair to say.
Okay.
But
will it stay the same, or do you think it will decrease?
That's where it's dependent, because that credit is dependent upon the total tax rate. I don't know if it's going to grow or stay the same or decrease even in the future, because it's dependent upon what is the county's rate, what is the township's rate, what is the city's rate, what is the school's rate. And that right now I don't know what the other units are planning to do in 2026 even.
Right. And then it's fair to say that local income tax will have through 2027.
Yes, that is fair. Yes. There was a lot in this legislative session. So no question is a bad question. Slide 15. This is really for me talking to Amber. You have a new step in 2029. There's an additional public hearing that's in purple, October 7. there's an additional hearing where if you were to have any increase in your tax rate or any increase in your levy, we need to average a second hearing before your public hearing. There's 2 public hearings now. This is actually a fairly long runway. I think this is 2029. Just something to be mindful of.
Talk to you before then.
We'll talk. We'll talk. All right, that was a legislative update in 16 slides. I know that was really kind of heavy, and I understand that there was a lot in there, but if anything kind of jumped out at you, any questions I could at least write down and try to get an answer back to you on before we kind of go into the second part of the presentation.
I feel good. For the first time, I feel like Amber and I will continue to ask that question until we start to prepare the 2026 budget, but it's been hard to even get a rough estimate of the impact that we will see in 2026 from all of this. And so I already feel better that I feel like we have a rough estimate now that we can work with.
I appreciate that you know that it's a rough estimate.
Yeah.
It's the year one for us to try to.
Well, and I understand, like, nobody knows what this is gonna look like until we start seeing what the tax credits start to do. I realize that, but I mean, I feel like they being the experts in this world, not me, the normal person in this world, should be able to give it, is it 50,000? Is it 200,000? Because that's a big difference. And it's hard to be thinking about starting your budget process in August, September, and you're living in the world of unknown. So I feel a little less living in the world of unknown at this point. So I appreciate that.
You're welcome. And I also will just say, the Department of Local Government Finance is also sorting through this new law as well. I mean, they have their own interpretations to make. We've been talking with the DLGF, some general counsel, so on and so forth, because what exactly was signed into law, exactly how can that be interpreted and then implemented? It really is up to some, not debate, but just interpretation of everything that was passed in the bill.
I talked to the county auditor, on Tuesday, he was like, don't worry about anything. It's gonna be fine. I'll wait till my real numbers come and be like, remember that conversation?
I will say, I mean, but Sandy made an excellent point right off the bat is, well, assessed values could just grow. I mean, yes, there's more deductions. I mean, that's taxpayer relief. I mean, and that's good. And so, but what if assessed value outpaces that? Your AV grew 13% last year, right? So, I mean, it's just how do you, we're working on the beginning of the quantifying of all of this when, anybody who would have told you in 2022 that assessed values go up 20%. I mean, I don't think anybody really saw that, coming. So,
right.
It's just trying to prepare what we're attempting to do is try and prepare. Which actually, one thing we didn't talk about at all was it's called House Bill 1001, which actually is the education funding component of it. And the per pupil funding on average increased roughly 1% approximately. It depends on a whole host of factors, but what that means is that we're going to get 1% more from the state per kid than we did last year in 2024. And so just keep that in mind. Everything about this presentation, property tax, that's the 93 cents. That's the operation and debt fund. The education fund, which we talked about, is a huge revenue component for the school. That has about a roughly 1% increase in the education fund formula.
What did it have last year?
You can ask me that.
It's okay. I'll follow up with you. Because that's a lower increase than what we have seen the past several years?
The last biennial budget, there were some substantial increases in the education funding. Yeah, this one is not at that level.
So when we think about new money and compared to what we've been able to have as new money, it will be less.
Yeah, especially because obviously we need to make sure the enrollment maintains or grows. And so if you lose, I don't know what the break even would be for Nettle Creek, but if you lose 10 kids, does that offset the 1% increase per pupil, for example? Also, the 1% that's a rough number. It is different for each school.
Yeah.
But that's a huge component, of course, of the school's revenue is the education fund.
And hitting the 65% and continuing to have competitive teacher salaries and keep people happy at the bargaining table. Perspective. Also offering great educational tools to our students. Let's not forget that.
Scott, we need some good ball teams to attract people.
Well, just like curricular materials and yeah, all of it.
Okay. Are you ready for the second part of the presentation?
Yep.
This part should look familiar because if the board had the meeting yesterday, I don't know, I think Ron went over some of this information, but this is looking at the school's debt profile. And so hopefully this would match a lot with what the school saw yesterday. But understanding the debt profile of the school is going to help understand what's the debt service tax rate doing? How is that going to impact our total tax rate? Is the debt service fund in a position to alleviate the operations fund? And thinking about how we could potentially pull some sort of lever to help the school corporation accomplish its goals. So at the end of the day, you can see that the school here on this slide, slide 18, has 4 bonds outstanding and 1 loan. That common school fund loan matures in 2026. That's in gray. The school has a refunding and improvement bond from 2015. That's in dark navy blue. There's a 2020 general obligation bond. I think that's like a green color, off the gray color. Not really sure. There's a 2021 bond. That was about 4.3 million. That's baby blue. And then there was the 2023 general obligation bond. That's in green. Each individual payment is bringing us to a total that will build Amber's budget. So we look at 2025, we had a budget of approximately $1.5 million in the debt service fund to make these 5 bond payments. That is what is driving that 37-cent debt service tax rate. We're looking about the total tax rate slide. We talked about debt service being 37 cents. Based upon today's AV, $1.5 million of debt payments will generate a 37-cent debt service tax rate. So if all else is constant, if AV stays constant, in 2026, our debt service payments drop by about $250,000. So we would anticipate that the debt service tax rate would decrease accordingly because we can't ask for more than these debt service payments are budgeted for. So instead of having a $1.5 million budget in debt, $1.25 million rate would fall, so on and so forth. So every single year you can see until 2029, that debt service bond payments are coming to maturity, which would mean if you did nothing and AV stayed the same, your debt service tax rate would eventually be 0 by 2037. We're going to skip slide 19. That is the school's general obligation bonding capacity. I'm certain you reviewed that last night with Mr. Cross, so we're going to skip this for the time being. But on slide 20, these are the parameters that were established at last night's board meeting with the school looking at a $995,000 general obligation bond. You can see here that we are estimating about $126,000 of interest expense on this bond using a slightly conservative interest rate of 5%. Today, the interest rate on a general obligation bond would be closer maybe to 4 to 4.5%. But we are assuming a 5-year term, and we would not anticipate an increase to the debt service levy. So we're not increasing above $1.5 million of that total budget from 2025. In 2026, we would anticipate having that same number. And that if AV stays the same, that would be 0 cents increase to the debt tax rate. After a bond cost of issuance, you would see that leave approximately $860,000 to perform the projects throughout the school that we're looking to accomplish. How this looks though, on slide 21, our next slide. This is there's a lot on this slide, but I think the visual is helps tell the story of this 2025 general obligation bond. Of course, so this is the proposed navy blue amount. That is the 5-year term that you see in 26, 27, 28, 29. So this bond would come to maturity by 2030. Now, I do want to pause here. I spoke a little out of turn and told you that the budget would be the same and the tax rate would be the same, and the levy would not increase. There's something factored into this levy estimate. It's called operating balance. The DLGF in 2014 changed operating balance to be able to be at a maximum of 50% or 15%. And all debt after 2014 being issued is now at a 15% operating balance. And that is the reason why we're actually able to pay a little bit more in principal in next year in 2026, is we're going to utilize some of that operating balance based upon this required spend down. And this is essentially what this does is help us minimize interest cost. But after these 2025 general obligation bonds are paid, you would see we have a couple of different colors here as far as what capacity is left for the school if we issue this $995,000 general obligation bond, factoring in that we know those gray bars, those are our existing debt service payments. They are declining. Again, all were paid by 2036. What does this leave for other potential projects, other necessary maintenance items that the school may need to get to? And also built into the equation here is we heard from Emily about the need to replace technology. So we've built in a technology common school fund loan. That's a loan. It's not a bond. It's a loan through the state. It's a 1% interest rate. There's no cost of issuance. It's really a beneficial program that state offers. And there's also in the, I guess, another blue color bar. I apologize. A lot of blue on this slide. I apologize for that. We also heard that the need to replace buses. And so what we've built in here is a school bus replacement plan, essentially, that is financed by general obligation bonds. And that's about an annual payment of $450,000 if the school is looking to replace 2 to 3 budgets, so on and so forth, or 2 to 3 buses. If you were to do this type of, we want a technology loan, we want a bond for buses, this would leave about $5,550,000 of additional borrowing for the next 20 years if you were to stay at this $1.5 million budgeted amount. So really just thinking about our future capacity is about $5,550,000, but this does also factor in the bus replacement and technology loans. And so this number would increase if you didn't like the bus replacement plan and the debt. Imagine that $5.5 million figure growing if you're like, we don't want a bond for buses. That's not what we want to do. And so realistically, we're just trying to get you a number of, let's take care of the buses, let's take care of technology, how much is left for anything else. And again, using a 6% interest rate, again, trying to be conservative, we're calculating about $5,550,000. But inherently, I do want to stress that this is like a 20-year plan. If you were to issue, let's just say you issued this bond at $5.5 million, those payments are not declining like they are now, right? We have payments that are declining where we have opportunities to potentially replace them if we want to. This structure, you can see those payments would be at $1.5 million for the next 20 years. So there wouldn't be that, hey, payments are falling. Is there something we could replace? Is there anything? I equate it to like a car loan. I've got $400 car payment due in 5 years. I just want to keep that payment the same, right? And so with another car loan or whatnot. So just keep that in mind that, yeah, $5.5 million, it's a lot of money, but it would potentially put some strain on your future flexibility if you wanted to stay at this like budget amount for debt service.
So what does that look like for future capacity? Does it limit you and you're pretty much locked into 2045? Or can you go higher, but then total tax service rate, which is, that's not the right term anymore, but is something else going to increase?
Right. If, for example, let's say this was the plan that the school wanted to implement and we get to 2030 and we're like, oh, we had a boiler go. And then if we have to replace the boiler, we have to also maybe do a part of the roof. 2030, we have another $2 million project to take care of some items. Essentially, you could issue a bond, but these budgeted amounts would not be 1.5 million. Maybe they're closer to 2 million. Like imagine another blue colored bar on top of the hashed blue colored bar, right? Visual.
Right.
And if we know that those annual payments drive the tax rate, we would also assume that if you wanted to go above this mark, yes, your tax rate would increase. Even if AV was growing, potentially that tax rate would increase. So it doesn't necessarily cap out the school. If you do this, you can do nothing. You could still do something, but your community would have to support a tax rate increase.
The Common School Fund Loan for Technology is one of the light blue colors. Is that thinking that is going to take into effect in 2027?
Yes, when I talked to Sean, that was the no application this year in 2026, or excuse me, in 2025, but maybe applying next year for the loan program. Applying next year, it would hit the end in 2027.
How long do those last?
The technology loan cannot have a term of more than 5 years. We don't like to have, we don't want to amortize a tablet for 10 years. That useful life matters on that. So the technology loan cannot be over 5 years. And today it's still 1% interest rate, which is the bond market will not be, so it's really a great program.
So Braden, we tried to have a conversation about that and instead of doing like we are right now and doing all of our technology refresh at once, is basically do what we're doing with the bus replacement plan. And every year we're getting 2 more buses. So maybe every year we're using the common school loan to refresh a couple of grade levels. And so you're doing something every year, but it's not everything. It's on a rotation.
And I think it makes a lot of, you don't want to be caught in this place where your lease is up, it's like a clean slate. So, I mean, I think that does make a lot of sense.
It's great to do it all at once, but it's also.
Well, and you see the long term and you don't put yourself in a position like we've been in this last year and right now where we're having to make some pretty quick decisions. And there's a schedule.
Yes, and yeah.
And you know that it's going to, for the most part, stay on schedule.
Oh, do you know like how much we could take it out?
Well, that was my next point it's a loan through the state, and in the application, you cannot apply for more than, what's the word I'm looking for? $100 per ADM per student. So that's why 1,100 enrollment, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
950 ADM, 1,100 enrollment. I can't. So, anyways, that's the 110,000 of $100 for 1,100 students, and so because it would be like an annual ask, that's where you have to ask yourself the question: is 110,000 does that give us one class refresh or not? Right, as far as the tablet is concerned, or the freshman coming in, does that give them a Chromebook? I don't know what system. So that is something where you need to be mindful of. It is a limit as to how much that you can own through the state through this program.
So Braden, I think we need to probably think about what would 110 get us? What does that look like in ensuring that no class goes too long without a refresh? Does it fit our schedule? But I also think we need to think about starting that in 2027 the right time.
Were we originally thinking 750 for technology? Is that what the number was?
Mhm.
Somewhere around
And for-
seven.
And how many years was that for?
I'd like to see 4. So that'd be.
So 110 doesn't do it.
Yeah.
That's the math I was doing too.
But I mean.
If you can do that loan every year.
Yes.
Oh,
'Cause,
oh.
I mean, we were sitting at about
Versus 750.
about 540,000, give or take, replaced all second through 12th grade. So no, I think, I mean, a couple grade levels a year, that would handle that.
The one bit of good news is.
Well, but if, sorry, so what'd you say? 540 for all grade levels? Where was the 750 coming from then?
That included staff max.
Staff, okay. Well, I mean, just thinking about that need then, I mean, we're looking at 750 and we want that set of equipment to overall collectively last 5 years. So really, if you're looking at staying up with everything, you need that 750 divided by, or 4 years is what you said, right? So 750 divided by 4 is what you would need to stay
So
current.
is there another loan or something we can get to fill the gap, or?
Yeah, actually, I was gonna say, the good news about the Common School Loan Program is there's actually 2 application periods per year. So you could then do maybe $220,000 a year. You apply in the spring and then you apply again in the fall. You'd still be tied to the 100 per ADM, but you could annually be looking at this. So 2 applications, but combined, looking at maybe something closer to 200,000 for the Common School Loan Program. We can adjust that to show what it looked like if it was 220,000 as opposed to 110.
There's only 1% interest on that, is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah, unbeatable. I don't want to say.
Yeah.
A great rate.
Everything.
It's kind of a no-brainer, it feels like.
Right.
And
So I mean, possibly $200,000 a year. I mean, 4 years, there's,
sorry,
sorry.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I was just gonna say, and no cost of issuance. So it's,
Yeah.
you apply for 200, you get 200. You know, I want to be transparent for the bond, 995, and then 860 after a bond cost of issuance. So that is something to 100% factor in.
Just gotta stay on top of it and make sure that we get those submitted in time.
And it is very common that that is used for technology refreshes. That's a question that they ask every year on our statewide technology survey. And it's like, no, we're not the only ones using like a geo bond, but it is more common to use Common School Loan at this point without the fees coming back in to help replenish that.
It's a no-brainer. If it can cover your technology loans, I think it's a very, very good program.
So our projected debt, what does that do? Right now, we're at 37 cents on our debt service.
Yes.
So what does that turn that into? Or we're talking here, I mean, what does our debt service turn into then?
So if we were to keep so I want to start with, let's not think about 37 cents just yet. Let's think about this annual budget ask. And so, you know, I think very quickly off the top, you could say that if you were to do the Common School Loan Program at 220,000 per year, as opposed to 110, you'd probably be looking at, you know, $1 million less of bonding capacity, maybe 4.5. Right? That's a rough estimate. I can get you the actual. I will tell Sean when we get back tomorrow. I want to update this to show the larger Common School Loan Program. I think that it can cover your class needs. And I think we should adjust this additional capacity number accordingly.
Just so I understand the debt service, the only thing magical about that is staying under 70, staying far enough below it that we're not
Asking for
Right,
the
hitting
community.
the
to-
ceiling, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
to-
Put on it.
I don't, what point is kind of the magic number that you don't want to go above on?
You know, that's a great question. There's a lot of different metrics that we see out there. So I'll just, obviously I like numbers and data. But the average tax rate in the state is a little over $1. The average debt service tax rate is about 44 to 45 cents. And so those are just, you know, think about where are we compared to our peers? Are we an outlier? You know, either in the middle, so on and so forth. But also when we go to approach Standard & Poor's for a rating, sometimes bonds required to go, in order to be purchased, they need a rating from Standard & Poor's or Moody's. Sorry. And they use a number that's important to them. It's debt per capita. So it actually has nothing to do with this graph, but more how much principal outstanding does the school have on all of its obligations? And then how does that apply to the population of the area? And so, you know, for Nettle Creek, I'll just pull this up briefly, because there's a range that S&P has for like, this is good, this is high, this is
Mhm.
moderate, and that's gonna take me too much time to find on my
Yeah.
email, but I can give that to you, because it's helpful to know,
Well, if you're saying average is 40 or 45 cents, I mean, we've got room to move up a little bit and still be,
if you, yeah, right, if you want to be in the middle, yeah, I that's a state average.
probably don't want to be too much above the middle.
Right.
We're well below average for our area.
That's what I was gonna say, is that's a state average, and Wayne County is much different than LaPorte. So, I guess sometimes people like to see, how do I compare to my peers? You cross over into Henry County, what are they paying in Henry County, so on and so forth. So,
Okay, thanks.
you're welcome. I have to tell Sean, he's helping me on this. I gotta tell him the blue is too much. That was a lot of blue. And I didn't know how to describe. I don't know. What's the difference between those two in the middle? Navy, or, baby blue and light baby blue? Regardless.
Better on the screen. It's kind of a teal. Light teal.
Hope it's,
I mean, feel like you're looking at like paint swatches.
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I, before we go on, because now like looking at this, I'm kind of, and maybe it's more of a question for the board, but I get a little nervous talking about, using our full debt capacity of 5.5 and locking ourselves in for that long. So my question would be, if we decide maybe it's not 5.5, maybe it's 3 or 2.5, would I be able to share with you? Could we run an illustration with using a 2.5 or 3 and see what then that looks like on payment year?
Absolutely. And, realistically, you can see how much those bus replacement bars take. Yeah, I know that's a pretty large line item in the operations funds. I mean, but I guess you don't necessarily have to borrow for that either. So thinking about that component of it as well, of the bus replacement plan, does it need to be a bond?
Yeah, and I think that right now, yes, because I think that we let our bus fleet get so old and things, but we going through one geo bond and every year replacing 1 or 2 buses and having a mechanic who is staying on top of things. I wonder what that will do to us in the future, and maybe we won't need to do that all of the time. But that's a hard question to answer right now because our bus fleet is pretty old.
What's our quantity of, how many buses do we have?
We currently have 17 4-out buses.
That's mainly what I was looking for. That's mainly what I was looking for.
I would say out of those 4-out buses, we probably have, I was just counting, there's at least 5 that I can tell you that eventually I know that are closer to me.
Well, no, I mean, what I'm thinking through is, okay, so if we've got 17 buses and we're looking to replace 2 per year, our oldest buses are going to be 8 or 9 years old constantly. And that's if we keep buying 2 buses. So
How many years does it take them to rust out? I would imagine that's probably going to be the deciding factor on some of those.
What's our oldest bus right now, Jason? Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think we probably need to look at that and think
but I
about.
think that's where we start. I mean,
Yeah.
we figure out, okay, where do we want that oldest bus to be? What's an acceptable age for that? And work out, does 2 a year just keep us afloat?
Right.
Or, you know, at some point, do we go to one year and two the next, one year, you know, so we got to figure out that number first.
How old did you say our oldest one?
Got a spreadsheet somewhere on later.
I would say, man, 10 years. I don't know if you could push it to 15 or not on a bus. I mean, that's getting pretty old.
So our oldest bus is, well, we've got a couple of mini buses at 2014, 2015, and then our oldest, well, we've got a 2010 of a full-size bus, a 3 2011s, 2 2013s.
I just thought I've had to replace like stairs in them before and stuff, weld new stair sets because they rust out and stuff like that. That's one of those things you can't fix. That's not replacing brakes and engines and.
Mechanical wise is more of a, I think, issue. Engine transmissions, what we're seeing that. Rust wise, I don't think really too bad.
Okay.
Mechanical.
Okay.
Nothing substantial.
Yeah.
The emissions. Some of the older buses that have the newer style emission stuff on. It's.
Imagine.
It seems pretty fair that, I mean, for the short term, we definitely need to utilize the debt fund for buses and technology. That still seems like a pretty fair assessment.
I would say yes, but I think that Braden and Jason and I probably need to go back and put together a long-term replacement plan. What does that mean for cost? And then what does that look like from a common school loan standpoint and a GO bond standpoint? And then I think we need to provide you all a maybe a little bit more accurate plan that we feel confident in as far as those debt projects to then update this more accurately.
I will say if it's helpful for a visual, I would just reiterate again, those navy blue bar, no, not navy blue, baby blue bars on slide 18. Of those, that was a $4.3 million bond. You know, so I do want to talk, that was a $4.3 million bond that we took out all the way to a 17-year term, or excuse me, a 15-year term. So just kind of for a frame of reference, you can see just that, yes, this is a, you know, pretty large payment, but also the bus plan and the technology plan does take a decent amount of that capacity. So I just, there kind of was no bus plan or technology plan, so to speak. And so just keep that in mind of you, the school has borrowed, you know, that $4.3 million mark before.
Yeah.
And so it just factoring in that it's the necessary needs of the bus and the technology.
Yeah. And so my thought, and you all can chime in, but trying to think about long-term, just, I don't know that we had a plan that was given to me or shared with me. Maybe we had one, I don't know, but to have a long-term plan of, this is how we're going to replace technology and this is how we're going to fund it. And same thing with buses. Instead, I feel like that plan was like, oh gosh, our technology is 1 year past its lifespan. What are we going to do? And I don't want to live in that space. I want to have it quote unquote budgeted in so that we know it's going to be funded. We're going to be able to have buses that aren't breaking down, technology that is usable, and not have to make these quick decisions. It's a forecasted, projected plan instead of like, I could answer that question that we're going to have good technology in 2028. But then that's also, I think, a little bit different. And I don't fully understand that because I'm only year 3 sitting in the seat. But I think that seems a little bit different than how we have. I don't know how, maybe they did have a plan previously, but questions, thoughts, comments for Jason? Yeah, I think it's a lot to process, and every time I sit down with you guys, I understand more and more and more. So I appreciate it and appreciate just the detail that you all provide us. It gives us a lot to think about too.
You're very welcome. And, I would just say, I know we're talking about capacities and technology and buses and all that, but realistically, again, your debt payments are falling and all your bonds are paid within 12 years. So you're in a spot to where you have some options, and having options is good. Having flexibility is good. And so I really appreciate hearing that you want to put together a bus plan, a technology plan, marry them together. What can we pay out of ops, out of debt? I think that's great. So I appreciate the chance here. I know Senate Bill 1 it's intense. And so if any question you may have, it changed the game a little bit. And so just if you have any questions about it, you think about something, just let us know and we'll try to get back to you. May not have the answer, frankly, but we'll try.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Welcome. Thank you.
Very helpful.
Is there a second?
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it.
Very welcome.
Our $1.5 million debt.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's-
Oh my God. You should have been like, hey.
All right.
And really, that line should kind of, flow with inflation type.
So here, I think,
Word might change that a little bit. You don't need to stay if you don't want to.
you can probably go if you want, because I actually, I don't know if we'll get there this evening,
All
so.
I heard was $5 million field house.
I think you must have often been dreaming.
Maybe he was in, right?
Well, if you get somebody like Chrysler to name it, we can probably do it.
Oh.
Thank you for letting me know. Yes, Ross.
I appreciate you being here, Scott. So I think before we consider projects, I think we need to consider the capacity and what we want to do there. And maybe we need time to think about that, but I would ask for any initial thoughts that you might have regarding that. Because I think we have to establish that before we can establish what projects we want to talk about. So any thoughts on, whether it's the full capacity of 5.5, if it's half?
Well, I think to start with, we're saying we're doing the common school loan twice a year instead.
Yes, agreed.
5.5 becomes 3.5,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that's an additional 110 every year for 20 years. You have to take out of that.
Actually,
5.5.
twice a year from what he just said. 'Cause you can.
Well, but 110 is already accounted for.
Oh, okay, got
It's
it.
already in
Got it.
this teal.
Got it.
So if you think about two of those teal boxes being there,
Yeah.
And so maybe here's a better, maybe we don't even need to have a conversation yet. Maybe we get an updated graph on the common school loan 2 times a year. And then also are we for sure that we want that GO bond for bus replacement continuous? Or is that a break for something else? What does that do? Maybe we need, Jason and I need to get a better idea of what that looks like.
I'm going to ask again, just because it's been a
Yeah.
while since I asked, but it was probably 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 2 years in a row. instead of buying two new buses, we bought two, or no, at the time, we were only replacing one. So instead of buying one new bus, we bought two used buses. I think they were 3 years old. I don't know what the market's like today at the time with the number of, with the age and the
Thank you for that.
anticipated lifespan. I mean, my calculations were showing they were a better deal.
The used.
Used buses.
Buying a 2 or 3 year
Thanks, Jason.
Jason.
Appreciate it.
used bus for the price that, well, basically we got two for, think about them being roughly half off and you're only losing 2 or 3 years of life out of them. It worked out pretty good.
Felt like buying a used car.
Yeah.
Right.
So I don't know if there's still a market out for 'em- out there for them.
I
It
think,
was then.
Is a new bus like 150, is that?
Roughly.
So, yeah, roughly.
I think-
I think they went up about 30,000. To 3 years.
I think the reason we were able to get some used buses in good condition is that, East Central Service Center, if I'm remembering correctly, used to do the bus driver training. And they were no longer going to continue that. And so they had purchased some buses to have at their training site. I'm not sure if there is a market out there for used buses in good condition. And if that would be an option, that is something that I think Jason and Charlie might look into and.
And maybe it's not every year. If
Right.
they're probably not available for us every year, but if there are years where we can find them and it makes sense, I mean, that's another option to look at,
Yes.
to just kind of creep back, work back to where we're ahead of this thing.
From what I've seen, that's ordering buses tends to, so we receive.
Since it's a long lead time.
Couple months behind.
So you said, what'd you say, 150, 160?
140.
Okay, so let's say 150. So, I mean, the bar that we're looking at here looks like it's probably 450-ish.
The capacity of
Yeah.
that current bond, do you know, Amber, off the top of your head, what that total number was for the 2023 GO bond?
Total bond?
Yeah.
1.25. Sorry.
What was that? What'd you just ask her?
What the amount for the 2023 bond? Was 2023 or was it 2020?
Bus bond was 23. Either 1.325 or 1.25, regardless, it's in that ballpark.
And what was the 2020 before?
Technology.
That was technology. Okay.
There were some maintenance things thrown in towards the end, but. Cause I think we only used around 685,000 of that for technology. And the rest went elsewhere.
In February of 23, we bought a new bus. It was 168 or 169. And in 2025, this will be October, received a bus and it was 146.
So I guess where I was going, I mean, this bar here,
Mhm.
I mean, it's something like 450 or so ish. Which I know there's finance charge in there too,
Is
and
this
things like that.
for the bus replacement?
Yeah,
Yes.
Bonds the only financing or best financing option to get buses, or I mean, are there other?
Unless you take them out of the operations.
that's what we used to, I mean, they used to come out of the operations.
Many buses have probably almost over, they definitely over double. Only just over, was over 100. And, in 2021, it was 56.
What did you say again, John? This
Well, I was just
is-
at, so
what-
if we've got 450 in this bar,
Yes, that's what I.
where did that number come from? Because that's definitely more than 2 buses a year. I mean, what assumptions was that
Yeah.
payment made on is I guess my question. On now, but that'd be a question for Jason, say put this together.
We were 2023.
That's closer to 3 a year, I guess, or you know,
Today's prices. At today's prices.
yeah,
We got
yeah, that's true.
4, looks like 4.
Are you sure they weren't 2 from 2022 that got delivered in 2023?
Yeah, 'cause we had a delay there somewhere.
Those buses, those are 2024 built buses. I don't think. You want to show
All 4 of them?
all 4 of them?
Question is, when did we
Got a used bus in
When did we,
2024.
budget for them though, right?
Right.
January 2023, we all used bus. So,
What's your, I mean, back to my question earlier, what's your ideal max age for a bus in our fleet?
um, answer that accurately.
I mean, that's kind of the starting point, I think. We know what the ideal, like, may not be what we get to, but what's, you know,
And not only that, but then you also factor in consistency of maintenance plans and just keeping them viable.
mhm.
What's that do to the lifespan as well? So,
I can tell you that our, like, just based off what Charlie told me, the amount of work he's done on it. The purple many buses have definitely started to show their. And they seem to run well, but Friday night.
What year are those?
They are the
14s.
14s.
Look. If it's like some of these newer buses, they're 24 and about 23.
What are other questions or thoughts I need to ask or we need to consider?
I asked Jason if we could. If we could not take as much money, like if we didn't need to take the full $210,000. As of right now, we would only have to take, like, we would need an additional 35-ish thousand dollars over that 110 per year to stay on a full 4-year refresh.
You don't have to take the whole.
That's what he said, we didn't have to. He said we just would have to take it in a timely manner. So, and spend it in a timely manner. Because
I think we need to determine from a technology replacement projection, what is the cost of that? And then that drives what we take or ask for requests on the common school loan. And then I think that then drives the number that's put into this graph.
if we stayed right where we're at right now, not factoring any cost going up, it would be 143,000 per year.
I think you have to factor in cost.
That's what
Going
numbers? That's your 540 over 4 years?
If we took 715 is I think where we're gonna end up at spending. Fully. Currently, right now. And if we took that and took it out 4 years, it'd be 143,000 per year. Is what we would need. And that would replace. So if we did like, say, staff in 9 through 12 in 2027, and then 2028 was grades 6 to 8, 2029, grades 3 to 5, 2030, K to 2, and then repeated that cycle.
Then 5% inflation or something.
Yep. Now, I will
Well,
say,
I don't know though. I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm,
since we've purchased, I mean, just from, this is weird, but from, I mean, just 1 year ago MacBook to today, it dropped $100.
that's what I was getting ready to say. I mean, when we look at cost of Chromebooks and iPads and MacBooks, pretty flat or even down.
Yep. And it doesn't mean we have to buy, you know, the same model or as nice as a model next time around, or we could do something different with the warranty. And it's like, once you hit year 5, you're going to have included or extra costs because they're no longer under warranty at that point. The maximum warranty you can get is 4 years. So you can purchase a 5th year, but that comes at a cost of $35,000 for just that 1 year to cover your entire fleet. So, but, and that also doesn't incur the cost of like, or what we could recoup out of a, I mean, potentially 3-year-old MacBook at that point. If we refreshed in 27 and we refreshed staff and you sold those off, you're going to get good money out of those.
Do you do that currently with the old
We
one?
did that this year. So we are getting 200 out of the $250 that those are being purchased at. And then out of the iPads, we'll get $64 out of the $80 that those are going to be sold out of. And so it's like, we could potentially recoup a huge chunk of what we just spent to put back into that bond. So.
Is the, I understand 4 years is the ideal. What are the main issues with 5 versus 4? So you mentioned the additional warranty.
Really just warranty costs. I mean,
do you see a dramatic increase in repairs and replacements?
we did this year specifically. I mean, we sent out, I think, close to 75 iPads. Like,
Because here's where I'm going with it. And I think that's a huge deal when our entire set of equipment is the same age and all of them are on their 5th year. But if you break that up into a rolling 5 years to where only a 5th are going to be that, instead of 75, you're talking about 15 that have to be shipped off, and a 5th of your collection of devices that have to have that 5th year warranty cost. So I guess I'm
that is
just wondering if it's more manageable going to 5 years if we're replacing a 5th of it every year.
Yeah, each year. Yeah. Because the weird part about, oddly enough, like this past year, what is being released from Apple right now with whatever iOS 26 actually wouldn't have even supported the devices that we just got rid of, which is weird for Apple because they are normally supported for 7, 8 years, but yet that was a 5th year device and they're stopping that support now.
They're not getting iOS 26 at all, or they're not getting those new features that they're
Not at all. 7th gen is not getting it at all in Intel Mac.
I know, yeah, that doesn't surprise me, but
So
They're in age or grade. Was there any rhyme or reason to a group that you had to fix more of?
not really. I mean, anything from like K to 3, they all stay in a classroom. So there's a lot less breakage. It was more, they began to fail, just straight up fail. And then we actually didn't get them back. Our credit from Secure Tech Solutions that does that warranty repair was over $6,000. Now granted, they were warranting those devices much higher, like it was like close to $400 MacBook and I think $300 an iPad or something like that. But I mean, we had that many go off that didn't come back that they're getting over $6,000 and just credit. So, I mean, our break rate did significantly go up this year, but if we're only doing, yeah, a fourth or a fifth of the whole fleet, then that cost would be cheaper.
What's your, was it 720? What's your 720 over 5 years then?
720 over 5 years.
Is that what you, is that,
Or 4 years would be 143.
and what is it over 5 years, just for comparison's sake?
Or, oh, I'm sorry, that would be, right? Yeah. Yeah. No, that is over 5 years.
The 140 is over 5 years. Okay.
Yeah, I thought 4 was the 187-ish. I don't know what number I started with. What do you say our total cost was?
Be out the door, I think we'll be close to 715. So at 5 years, that's 143. That's 178. So. But yeah, I mean, it's Google's support. They're out, I think, close to eight years on a Chromebook. I don't know how a Chromebook's ever supposed to last 8 years. I think it's a joke, personally. But I mean, like, unless they stop doing that, like, I mean, they will be good regardless. Like, so they're guaranteeing support for 8 years at this point. So, I think it's crazy, but yeah. I think personally, I think what we purchased, as long as we don't have a high break rate, it is spec'd towards the future with a better screen, more memory, that, you know, I think they could last 5 years as long as they just don't break. So we went with a little bit of a higher end, and it was $30-ish per device more, but I think it would last that if we had to take it out as far as in today's spec. So we went this long with what we had, and I would hope it wouldn't go a lot higher than that.
Technology loan, is there anything else it's good for other than these devices? I mean, is that all that you can get this loan on, or?
I have no idea, to be honest.
I mean, because if there's a little bit extra and you're just getting the full amount, I mean, can that roll over to other technology needs, or is it even have to be limited by technology? I don't even know.
I do know it is limited to technology, and I think for Amber, is there a capital projects one?
There is, but the rate is not as cheap. I
I was just saying, because I mean, this one being 1%, I mean, you're not going to get financed cheaper than that.
So like, can you use a common school loan on BenQ boards if you have leftover dollars and request all of it?
I know we've used common school loan dollars for tech for, I don't remember what, but I do know that we've used that technology.
So here's what I think next steps are. I think I'll meet with Charlie and Jason and let's answer some questions on more so what bus replacement looks like for us and what the cost of that is. Maybe meet with Braden and go through a couple of situations on what that could look like. And then I think I give that to Jason and his team and maybe ask him to update these graphs, get some clarifying questions answered on some of this other stuff, but update the graphs with those two things updated, but also if we did a 2.5 capacity project, a 3.5 and a 5, and just so that we have a place to start and see and can compare. Does that sound like a plan?
Yes.
And then I think we circle back and decide, okay, which financial situation scenario do we want? And then from there, we'll talk about what we want to accomplish within that.
Yeah, sounds good. If it doesn't take too much time tonight, would it be worthwhile hearing from Jason and you?
Oh,
or who-
yeah.
What are our we got to do this in this time period items?
Looking at the high school roof, talking to a contractor. That's a ballast style roof. It's got gravel on it that holds the roof in right now. But the problem with what's up there is, of course, the age, and what that rubber does over time is it starts to shrink. So it's starting to pull away from the roof's edge around all
It's
the.
losing the flexibility.
It's shrinking, it's shrinking.
Okay.
And it's like all around the roof curves and vents and everything, it starts to pull the corners and it's pulling holes in the. There are several options as far as roofing goes. We can go back with the same style roof. I don't necessarily like that because when you go look for leaks, you can't see. You gotta rake back gravel and
Tear more holes as you're doing.
yeah, possibly tear holes in this. Some of the options that they talked about, depending on the condition of the insulation under the roof now, a lot of that insulation is recyclable. So if it's not wet, they can recycle it and that brings down the cost substantially. So price range difference, just from going back to the ballast roof to the kind of top of the line roof, and they can, on some of those roofing systems, they can come in and they refurbish it and put another coating on top of it. And that will thicken the roof back up. So as long as you don't have any major issues with the roof, the longevity, the price to refurbish the roof is much less than replacing the roofs. So it could be anywhere from, depending on how much we do, we could do it in sections. Anywhere from 500,000 to. They can do a scan of the roof and tell us where the most moisture is. They can kind of pinpoint where we've got the most moisture underneath the rubber membrane. But that's a little over $8,000 just to scan the roof.
How old's that?
I believe that's what they did though, with the elementary roof, and why they only, replaced did it in sections. I would have to dig, but we have those visuals somewhere.
I don't have
Okay.
a good date on how.
Probably pretty old though.
I can tell you, talking to Trinco, the company I've been talking to, I've learned they're a manufacturer of roofing products, and then they have licensed contractors that they and architects. And so they told me if you get over 300,000 on a project, that you have to involve architects stuff. So I learned quite a bit about roofs talking to those guys. And for me, to not have dealt with this style of roof before, to go up on the roof and see all that gravel and then all the concrete slabs in the corners, and I'm like, this is a lot of weight, And so after he explained it to me, that's what is holding the rubber down. And with where that school sits, the amount of wind.
Get a wind coming across it, just wants to suck it straight up.
So the amount of wind that building sees, to have those, that ballast up there is great. For that type of system. Obviously, there's upgraded systems now that do not require that.
Do we suspect any structural damage from the existing leaks?
No, I don't feel like I don't feel like there's anything substantial enough to affect the structure.
Probably safe to assume that the insulation where it's leaking though will have to be replaced. So I mean, there's at least some that would have to be replaced.
It's like this winter after everything had melted off. I was at the school and Christy's room, they got a hold of me. And she had a leak in her room, but I went in and pulled the ceiling tile out, and it was leaking around the roof drain. So I go up on the roof, there's no water on the roof at all. So it was underneath the rubber, and it finally made it to where that roof.
Hard telling where it came from because it
From a couple weeks earlier or something.
maybe all the insulation saturated up there.
But I can't
Yeah.
without either pulling the roof off.
It could be leaking one place and traveling So who knows where?
if you try.
Jason, besides the roof at the junior, senior high school, what other immediate needs did you identify?
At the high school, I've spent quite a bit of time with the heating and air at the high school. It seems like a lot of the newer units are from about the cafeteria lobby up towards the main building. The gym, the back hall, seems like those are, to me, those are original to build. Main air handlers for the gym, I believe those are probably original. The back hall, definitely. We have a couple units in the back hall that the cooling coils are unhooked. Because they are on the intake side of the unit. So in the wintertime, if it pulls cold air in, it doesn't have a heating coil to warm that air. And if it gets to the cooling coil, it probes the coil up and the coil will leak. So they just don't. We could put new coils in, but I think we'll see the same problem. So, one of the things I was kind of talking to Emily about today is, looking out into the future, where do we see this building? Do we see building a new high school in the next 10, 15 years? How far do we go with replacing, or do we?
You get one put up for $3.5 million.
And over fall break or the remainder of the summer?
So that's kind of where I'm at on it. What I don't know what to.
You know, the cost associated with those?
We did spring PMs with the company. They spent a lot of time repairing some things that we just wouldn't have time to get. Changing a lot of filters, and units that just weren't operational. Chiller, we found they found that it was in need of a lot of work at the high school. And we had 3 out of 4 zones were low on refrigerant, and 2 of them were almost empty. So I have a meeting with them on Tuesday, and we're going to develop a feeding process for Wes and Matt to look at 2 to 3 times a week to check pressures and temperatures. So we can get on top of a leak before it drains the zone. One zone holds 180 pounds of refrigerant at $480 per 30 pounds. So it gets costly quick if we can't catch it before it is. So that's something that we're trying to get ahead of some things before it costs us, like what the chiller costs. There's some at the high school. The concrete stairs from the parking lots are starting to show quite a bit of wear.
Starting to.
The way that they built those when they put them in and put the handrails in the concrete.
Yeah.
If they don't keep up on caulking around those handrails and they get moisture down in them and then it freezes and it starts to break concrete. Well, ice it'll break just about. So those stairs, the high school has never had soft water on the cold water side because of the pool. So we see a lot of line buildup in the plumbing, the toilets, the sinks. If we could separate the cold water supply for the pool from the building and get the building cold water on soft water, it would help substantially with that. There's some stucco repairs. That's one thing that Trimco is involved in as well. Learning a little bit about that. There's closed cell foam behind it, so when the stucco itself is just fairly thin, and the mesh behind it gets damaged or starts to wear through, and moisture gets to that foam, then you end up having to replace a large section of that stucco and that foam. So if we can patch those areas and repair them before it gets wet, it would be definitely cost savings there. Elementary. We just this week had the elevator breakdown. That elevator is about 25 years old. All of the controls and operating systems on that elevator are out of date, obsolete, and there are no replacement parts. So what we have right now is the control board that is on the elevator itself, the power source burned up on it. So TK, the elevator company that we use, they've taken that board, and there's a company in Maryland that is going to repair that as long as they can. And the repair cost on that is about $1,000. If they cannot repair it, our next option is a complete retrofit, which would replace all of the electronics, wiring, door opener, and the hydraulic unit.
It's the elevator to the basement mechanical. I mean, is that,
It's not necessarily to the mechanical room, it's just from second floor to lower floor, or, any special needs kids that we have.
Wheelchair,
Okay.
crutches,
Yeah.
can't get downstairs
Cafeteria.
Cafeteria use.
Yeah, okay.
to get breakfast food down there.
Like I kind of explained to him, my experience with hydraulic units, being in a foundry, this is a little bit different than this unit. I'm used to having to replace parts on hydraulic units all the time. The environment's way different. So for me to go into that room and be like, wow, this is really clean in here. The environment's great. But 25 years on that hydraulic unit, parts are eventually going to fail. We talking to the repair company and said we can roll the dice on the hydraulic unit and take 25,000 out of that. He said, but if we don't do it during the retrofit, that unit will end up costing us probably closer to 50,000. So there really is no, from talking to them, there is no other option. This board isn't repairable other than doing an upgrade on the components and hydraulic.
sounds like common sense would be to try to repair the board first and see.
Yep, and they will ship that out hopefully tomorrow or first of the week. And you talked, Frank was actually able to get a hold of the company that rebuilds them and say up to possibly 2 weeks.
Couple weeks. That was the lead time they give.
Part availability on stuff. So hopefully within the next, I don't want to say 2 to 3 weeks. I'll just say 4 to be conservative on that, on the elevator.
I will say the photos that I sent them, they did not have a rebuttal they just straight up said we could repair this board. If it was repairable type thing. So there wasn't.
25 years old, it's probably not super complicated.
I wouldn't think so. No, it looked like the capacitor had split open.
Yeah. It's probably a $5 repair.
The diode that, went, it's like, as long as it didn't totally burn out a raceway or something, it's like what they do, I would assume that they're pretty meticulous on.
They specialize.
Yes.
They specialize on rebuilding. So
All lifts and elevators and that type of thing. I would have hope that it's replaced.
Discussion we were having about jobs you didn't know existed.
Yeah,
There's no
right.
elevator board repair guy.
I did talk to TK about the actual, they call it cabin itself. He said as far as worrying about replacing the cabin or anything like that, so that that's nothing we should ever have to worry about. If you replace the interior, just aesthetic stuff. And so it's pricey to replace the interior on the road. It's just good operation.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing down here now, which was I came up this week. So I talked to Wes quite a bit about the air units on the roof, and I called them all today and talked to them. I talked to them about it, as far as just the housing themselves. As long as the housings are in good shape, I feel like, motors, fans, if we don't have issues with those, then we don't replace an entire unit when it comes to air units on the roof. We are closing in on the life expectancy on those units. But if we can replace coils way cheaper than replacing the entire unit, then that's the way that we should go. I don't have a cost on replacing it in area unit on those. But, that's something that Wes has, we looked at. The boilers, we haven't had resolve tech PMs on those yet. I know the two bigger boilers that we have here at the elementary are getting to the end of their life expectancy. I think if we do get to a point to needing to replace one of those, I think we do the same thing as that we did at high school. Put a boiler in that is twice the capacity is what we take out. That way, if the other one does fail, we've still got the same capacity, and we keep the one boiler for a backup in case something does happen. That's at the high school that actually we benefited from that this morning. We had the main boiler that we use faulted out, and we were able to start up the older boiler and recover while we were troubleshooting the new. It ended up being a fairly quick fix, but to have that other boiler there, I think there was some discussion previous, like with Brad and Jerry, about removing that second boiler at the high school this summer. But I think after Resoltech looks at it, and if they give us a good clean bill of health on, I don't see removing it. If it and utilizes that. It just gives us that. We're not going to gain anything from taking it out.
In the space. That's about the only thing you gain, right?
We don't need any more space for some of the concrete sidewalks, the curves are starting to show a lot of wear, especially in high school. There's a lot of uneven sidewalks, curves, like I said, they're taking us. I don't know. That's the sidewalk. Curb repairs. The curb out in the sidewalk. Or out in the sidewalks. Out from, there's a lot of actuators for dampers and cooling water and our hot water coils that there seems to be quite a few that I'm running into that which makes it hard to regulate the heat there. Several that we need to look at. That right now we can regulate through just adjusting some ball valves, but that's not how we want to set up. We want to be able to regulate the heat there through the PLC like it's set up. So we need to go. I'd like to get with the raw tech and go through these and see what's actually working and what's not working. So something I don't compare to. Outdoor lab. How far do we want to go with the outdoor lab as far as cleaning up the dead trees and the underbrush? I did get a quote. I just got a per hour. They can come in with a drum mulcher on a skid loader and an excavator with mulcher and go in and clear anything. I just told them anything that was 6 inches. They think that they can knock a big dent in the outdoor lab in about 2 to 3 days. Figure 2 machines at I think 180 an hour. So the excavator 150 something an hour. Skid loader to go in there, start clearing out underbrush, rock trees, and roots. Potentially fall. That's something that we talked about looking at as far as getting that to use. The main stairwells and front hallways We've got a handrail that's not present where the old chairs used to be. The handrails that are currently in there, we were moving to again. I was working with Whitewater Construction on trying to find replacement hardware for those to just put back in that one stairwell, what we already have, and repairing the other stairwells, and they cannot do any hardware. That's what we have. If we replace all the handrails and bring them up to something newer and up to code, that's, I would say, up to about 15,000.
I think in conversations with administrators and just obviously from a different perspective than what Jason has. Student and staff restrooms at the junior, senior high school need an update. Obviously, the playground at the elementary school, the PA and alert systems at both buildings, I think are maybe not as immediate as some other things, but still need to be taken into consideration. Lots of cosmetic things, just like painting of walls, wallpaper is falling off the walls at the junior, senior high school in the hallways. The carpet squares on the main floor are starting to come up and we're spending a lot of time gluing those back down. Carpet in the junior, senior high school library is very dated. Replacement of the remainder of the old security cameras as well. I think Braden, you did half of those. And so we're, not wanting to run those so long that they're not working and then we don't have them. I think locker rooms at the junior, senior high school, the PE locker rooms are extremely dated and getting to the point where there's a lot of showers not working. There's tile coming up, need to be addressed in the near future. I also think lockers, the actual student lockers in the hallways at the junior, senior high school, I don't know what other schools are doing, if students use those or not. If students still do, ours are unusable right now because they are so thin. If they don't, it's an eyesore and, maybe doing something with that space, or replacing the lockers. I think the main floor of the gym is not wheelchair accessible. And while that is not necessarily an everyday need, I think there are times where having wheelchair accessibility to the main floor would be helpful. When you think about from an athletic perspective, I think the press box at the football field is eventually going to need attention. The visitor seating at the football field is very dated. Tennis courts are in need of a resurface at some point, and maybe auxiliary gym bleachers as well.
When I hear people, I have heard this so many times from my own kids, from kids who have had sporting events here at the high school. I hear this, it's almost unanimous across the board. And so this was number one on my opinion. And I'm sitting here laughing because we need a roof. So the locker rooms, that's all I hear about, how terrible the Hagerstown locker rooms are. And I'm embarrassed by it. And then on top of that, this year, there was a swim meet, a basketball. I mean, we had so much going on. And so apparently kids were having to, do it in the, change in the hallways and in these other bathrooms. And so then someone said, well, didn't we used to have, where's the old locker rooms? Isn't there another area that can be used? And it opened this whole can of worms. And then people were all talking about, and somebody said, well, why don't they just fix the existing ones first? So it was this long drawn out conversation about locker rooms. And then they said, well, Ruthie, when are those going to be fixed? I said, I have no idea. So the locker rooms, and then I've heard elementary parents, of course, talk about the playground. And then one teacher, occasionally, if I meet them out, I'll say, what needs to be fixed? Anything, most of them say, no, everything's good. A science teacher at the high school mentioned tripping over safety hazards in the room because of kids not using the lockers, as you just said. They can't fit their bags. They come with these massive bags because they spend the entire day at school. He said it's a safety thing because, if you would have to leave for a fire or anything, he said he's nearly fallen several times trying to navigate the room. And then the next thing was there's something he needs is a chemical biology lab thing. I have no idea, that doesn't turn on. None of them work, so they can't do their science experiments.
No.
Maybe that's it. So again, I don't know how important those are in light of these, but.
You brought up the auxiliary gym bleachers. So I talked to Wes a little bit today. We would have to look into it a little bit deeper. We have a lot of just based off of like me and Matt, the new bleachers behind for the swim bleachers. I'm wondering if we can move those to the auxiliary gym, utilize those there, and buy something that is more suited for even cheaper. You need the seating capacity that set in the pool area has, and if not, would they be usable in the auxiliary?
I would say there's high school swim meets,
Yeah.
even junior high, they're full.
They're pretty full.
It's been a long time since I've been to swim, so.
They're pretty full.
Especially when we took out the one section because there's not enough room. I really feel like that made an impact
Well,
of
and it seems,
squeezing it in a little bit.
it seems
more.
like there's more three-way meets.
Yeah.
So you've got 3 teams there, and so you take up more space too.
One thing I forgot to mention too was the overhead.
What?
Overhead doors.
Oh, yeah.
Back hall in the back, the shop area.
So three of them for sure. The main shop doors are not in too bad a shape. The one for the main stock, the one that's behind the chiller, and then the one back there on the back side on the.
By the ag and
Ag area. Those are what start. Part of that compared to the C-channel framework around the doorway. The horizontal section at the top of the door, moisture's got on top of that channel. A lot of the channel for those doors is starting to sag, just rusting out. And just
What are we up to? You've been tallying that?
yeah, hang on, let me get my money tree.
Started out with the roof and then I stopped.
Yeah.
Even our max the max amount we have available doesn't.
Oh, won't touch.
I mean.
And so that's where I think we really, I think, need to get some updated illustrations.
Yeah.
I think we need to make a decision on what we want to do as far as amount and what that means for the future. And then I think we come back to the table. And it's the same thing when Amber and I first met with Baker Tilly and they said, do you have a need? I started rattling off every single tab. And they were like, clearly you have a need. I mean, we will always have a need. We will always have a need. We do just have to keep chipping away at it. And it's a hard balance because, Jason is the one who is seeing from a, keeping our buildings functioning
Yes.
perspective. Braden sees from a technology and safety perspective. We also have to take into consideration the look and appeal Our community wants to be proud of our school buildings. Our kids and our staff want to be proud of where they come to every day. And so it's a challenging balance.
Well,
And then people ask why we don't have the money to put up baseball lights.
been to a board meeting lately, we'll go through that. So we'll help you with that. So, well, roof, plumbing, things that move water. Those things, when they're a problem, they damage so many other things that you don't even know until you start trying to figure out how to fix them. So I do worry about those things as a priority because that protects the rest of
Absolutely.
the assets.
You can't have school. You can't have school if we have cold buildings in December.
Right.
Structural mechanical is definitely my number one. I mean, the roof leaking, I mean, that the steel in the school is gonna rust out and rot out if you let it leak long enough. I mean,
We don't have any, I don't found any water leaks, so I would say
Girls
that
who are naked.
one that gets brought up to me the most, and I get pictures.
So, yeah.
Is the back hall. So while we were up on the roof while I was up there with Trimco, and he had another one of his techs come with him. And we were thinking that the main leak was coming from the transition from the gym wall to that back hall roof. And there's 3 air vents on that wall. And they got to looking at those and the way the flashing and everything was done on those, that's where we think the actual leaks for that back hall is coming from. And if you look in the back hall where the spacing of those leaks almost match up with those air vents.
That like where the northeast entrance is to the gym, that right in that back hall, that area there that always had buckets under it. And I'm like, yeah, what is the deal?
Right there.
Okay.
And they think when it rains hard, that water gets to that vent. And instead of running out away from the building, it's running back through that vent.
Okay. So past the water things that allow other damages to happen, then it gets, and it's hard for me to prioritize over that, but then we're into safety things.
Yeah.
Things that are safety factors. And I'm stunned by $15,000 for handrails, but that's a safety thing. Locker rooms, actually, some of the things that are issues in our locker rooms are safety things.
Absolutely.
So it's not just the aesthetics and the space and all of that. There's some real factors. So we did a walkthrough a while back. And I'm like, this has got to somehow find its way onto a list somewhere. So
One of the biggest safety things, in my opinion, is the visitor football bleachers.
that they are awkward.
Yeah, I wouldn't let my kids on there.
I can't say I've heard about it. I couldn't tell you the last time.
It's been at least 2 years since I've
They're just real spaced out, and it's like structurally they're fine, but
so it's not that they're shaky.
no, and they're not gonna fall down or anything.
you could fall through
You
them.
could fall through.
Yeah.
It's
So
the
they're extremely aged.
Yeah.
right,
Yeah,
extremely.
And I have.
they were built when there were no codes around them, apparently.
It's September, I think, is when Lee Company is supposed to do inspections on all of them. But it was gonna be September before they can make it.
Now, oh, go ahead.
Structurally, like you said, structurally, they may be fine, but safety wise, and I don't know if there is any upgrades that they will be able to do to it, or if it just needs to be complete.
Right.
Replacement.
I guess that was a thought. Can you just enclose them so that nobody can fall through?
If they have panels that we can add to them, that would be an option, but
You could lose a small.
I thought when we did the walkthrough, I thought Jerry said something about that, and that there really wasn't a way to handle that with the retrofit, but
I
could
don't
be.
know about that. I do know that if you change anything from the original,
maybe
then it has to
that's what it was.
be ADA compliant, match all the compliance.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so
that's kind of.
that presents a challenge.
With the handrails, the
That's
same thing.
ran into with the handrails.
Yeah.
If we change what's there at all, it's gotta be up to code, and so instead of just having board handrails that stop right at the edge of the stairs, they'll come up to 16 inches on the landing, it will wrap around the inside. And then, it will be 12 to 16 inches at the top of it. It'll extend out.
Mhm.
So there's several different options as far as handrails go. We can go with, an aluminum handrail. We can go with steel handrails, composite. There are several different options that I got from Weasel Hunt. It ranged from 12 to 15 pounds. That's for all 4 stairs. Several.
And do like gas pipe and, do it ourselves. I'm kidding.
Up 2x4s.
Yeah.
How hard could that be, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, if we don't have anything else for this evening, I think we have a good plan on where to go next. And then I think we circle back to the conversation. I would say if there are any additional questions, either from a financial perspective or from a needs or cost perspective, just let me know and we'll work on those. But we will get some more detailed information and then circle back to another conversation.
Just one other thing to think about is with going forward with the bond to do full replacement with the technology, what is a transition to a partial, every 4 or 5 years full turnover? How does that look like? Because we're gonna, as of this year, all of our technology is going to be the same age. So when you start rolling them out and transition into a rolling recovery.
Yeah, so if I
Or rolling
understand, one of my thoughts was, so basically if we start in 2027, we're gonna be replacing devices that are 2 years old.
Right.
Right.
I think we'd get
So
decent.
you'd get a pretty good.
Even though Chromebooks don't have great resale, it's usually 25 to 30 bucks after 4 years. I would think we would get decent resale because they'd still be technically under warranty anyway.
Yeah.
So even in 2 years. And I can ask those questions to like a reseller too. I think he should be able to give me a rough estimate of what we could get. Even though it's 2 years out of past practice. So I think we can give you some details.
Okay.
All right. Well, guess we're adjourned at 7:47.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.